Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Procurement Snapshot. I'm your host, Jessica Spicher, and today I'm joined by Matt Lekstutis, who's one of our directors here with Efficio in North America. So, Matt, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for joining me.
Hello, Jessica. It's great to be here.
If you can just take a moment to introduce yourself and maybe speak a little bit more about the type of work you do with our clients here at Efficio.
Sure. Again, my name is Matt Lekstutis. I'm a director here with Efficio out of the New York office. I focus in predominantly around supply chain and procurement, mostly for our manufacturing clients in the manufacturing sector, working with topics like how do I take costs out of my business? How do I improve service levels? And, how do I think about my operating model in this future that seems increasingly uncertain with many, many different things in forms of disruptions coming at us, such as tariffs.
Beautiful segue, Matt. Thank you very much. That's the topic for today, tariffs. And what I wanted to talk to you about today is what can procurement do to help, right? I think there's certainly an element to this that is how does it impact broader company strategy? But if you put yourselves in the shoes of a CPO or a procurement practitioner, what's top of mind for you in terms of analysis that you can start to run or things that you can start to do to help put your company in a better position to react?
I think if there's one thing that's clear right now is that things are going to be unclear for a while, right? And if you're sitting in that office, right, within procurement, that lack of clarity, right, around necessarily what kinds of tariffs could be implemented, what regions of the world could they be applied to, what categories of goods, materials, or sectors they could be applied to. It's hard to know exactly, where to act, right? So that's really the first step, right? Is just understanding where your exposure could be. And there are some signals that we've gotten, right? Which are that, look, I think clearly China, Mexico, and Canada are in the crosshairs, right, for potential
Mhm.
tariff application. Understand what your supply base looks like in those regions, right? To what extent, are you procuring goods? What goods are you procuring from those regions? And start to segment that out. What is the material, which also have secondary sources of supply, perhaps out of other regions, and think about it from the perspective of, if something happens tomorrow, what's my response plan going to be, right? So if a tariff comes in, into China, what goods and services, can I begin to migrate to other suppliers? What might take longer? What things might require some investment? Where do I have tooling that would have to be moved, or design and development or qualification that would have to happen with another supplier, and
Mhm.
be able to answer those questions, right? So that the business can think through, in these different scenarios, what do we want to do? Because there will be cost impacts, and depending on the sector that you're in, some of the business will be able to pass those things along, some won't. But in every case, everybody's going to want to know, what that impact is and how much of it we can mitigate immediately, and then what can we mitigate over, some period of time. So that's definitely where I would start.
Just coming back to your point around, everybody is thinking about this. That means that suppliers are also actively thinking about this. And so, what's your take on the balance of being as a procurement function, once you understand your exposure and you start thinking about what does this mean for suppliers that I need to have some form of communication with? Or some sort of ask of these suppliers, or to change my engagement, or maybe rethink my commercial structure with these suppliers. Any thoughts or steer around, is it in your advantage to be the first mover and reaching out to your suppliers first? Or is it sometimes better to sit back and let the suppliers engage you? Because I think that's also just a very interesting dynamic to think about, is the timing element of this as well.
Right on, right? We hear a lot about, companies setting up war rooms to, sort of tackle this issue, but understanding the context that you're operating in is really important. It comes down to not just understanding where your supply base is, but where's your competitive supply base, right? So you want to know if you're more exposed to China than your competitors are. It's probably going to be in your interest to start moving right now. If you have a competitive advantage, say, you versus your competitors have, over the last several years, maybe since the last tariff actions, some years ago, have migrated your supply base already to, India, Southeast Asia, and in some cases, maybe you want to think about it a different way. I don't know about sit back, right? But focus on securing your position, getting longer commitments, perhaps. And if you take a look at what agreements you have in place and when they may be expiring, and ensure that, those that are creating the most advantage to you in terms of optionality, right, or limiting your exposure to those regions are renewed and strengthen your position in those. So it depends, I think, but it starts with, again, that understanding of, where you're exposed, but also laying that into, where your competitors are exposed or where they may have an advantage. So I would take a look at that, as I started to look at it. But, I think it's also a time to talk, right? I mean, it's not a time to, sort of sit back and wait, right? I think, you do want to get communications going. And I think, establishing an ongoing dialogue with your suppliers, even if it's just around collecting and gathering intelligence around what they're hearing, what other moves folks are making and things like that, particularly with your strategic suppliers. Have those conversations, see what they tell you, learn what other kinds of actions folks are taking and begin to inform, the strategy and tactics that you want to use. And also stay in touch with your industry groups. So, there will be exemptions, right? The tariff process is a political process, and, there often are exemptions granted to certain companies or to certain sectors. So find out what's happening, what your industry group is doing, the positioning that's there, and, get involved so you understand what those options might be and how you can bring some leverage to bear, if possible, to the advantage of your company and your procurements.
Absolutely. To summarize, there's limited risk to starting to think about this and move on it now. Much greater exposure or risk associated with being the last person to start to think through strategy and get your suppliers on board.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly, if you haven't thought through, exactly where your exposure is and had those discussions with the business around what the potential impacts, would be to the cost structure for your products and how they might want to deal with it from a pricing perspective, it's not too late. Get going,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
Start to move that forward. Yeah.
So Matt, thank you so much. You and I can continue talking for hours, if not days, on this subject, but I think in the interest of our promise around keeping these podcasts relatively short and sweet, I think we'll wrap the discussion for today. We have an upcoming webinar where we plan on discussing this topic in a little bit more detail in mid-February. I believe it's February 13th. So I encourage everybody who's just interested in learning a bit more to check that out and sign up. So in the meantime, thank you again for joining us, Matt. Appreciate the time. And to all of our listeners, we hope to see you soon on another Procurement Snapshot. Thanks for joining. Bye.